For my sister's big wedding, my family invited my 11-year-old son, but not my 9-year-old daughter. We've all decided she shouldn't come, they said. I just replied, noted. We won't be attending. Then, I made one quiet change. 3 weeks later, their lives were falling apart. If you'd walked into my kitchen that week, you would have thought we were preparing for a small royal coronation. Not because we're royal, we're not. My family sells that illusion the way some people sell essential oils, aggressively, and with a suspicious amount of confidence. But my daughter Ruby had turned Brooke's wedding into a project, a mission, a full-time job with unpaid overtime. There was a dress photo taped inside the cabinet door at Ruby eye level. There were index cards on the counter with neat block letters. Smile. Say congratulations. Ask one question. Do not interrupt. A little checklist with boxes she'd been crossing off for weeks. And there was Ruby in her favorite spot at the table, shoulders tense with determination, asking me for the 97th time. Mom, what do I do if someone asks me what I want to be when I grow up? I glanced up from the sink. You tell them the truth. Ruby frowned. The truth can be wrong. That depends on the person, I said. Owen, my 11-year-old, walked by and snagged a grape from the bowl. Tell them you want to be a dragon. Ruby didn't even look at him. That is not an acceptable career. It's a hobby, Owen said. And I watched him drift closer to Ruby like a little guard dog. He wasn't loud about it. He never was. He just hovered, ready to block a comment, hand her a fidget, change the subject like he'd been training for this in secret. Ruby tapped her pencil, then looked at me. Mom H, what are the rules again? I felt that familiar squeeze in my chest. The part of me that wanted to wrap her in bubble wrap and move us to a cabin in the woods where the only social rules were don't eat the poisonous mushrooms. I dried my hands. You say hello. You keep your hands to yourself. You don't touch the cake until they cut it. Ruby nodded seriously, as if I just explained a complicated legal contract. The phone rang and I knew before I even saw the screen that this wasn't going to be about napkins. It was my sister Brooke. Her voice was bright in that way people sound when they're already rehearsing what they're about to say. Hey, she chirped. Quick question. There are two kinds of quick questions. The harmless ones like, what time are you coming? And the ones that destroy something. I put the phone to my ear and turned slightly, my back angled toward Ruby like my body could block words. Yeah, I said. Brooke didn't waste time. So, we finalized the list. I pictured my parents hovering over a spreadsheet like they were planning an invasion. And we're keeping it tight, Brooke continued. Just to keep things smooth. There it was, smooth. The word my family uses when they mean controlled. Then she said it. Owen can come obviously, but we've all decided Ruby shouldn't. For a second, I didn't understand the sentence, like my brain refused to process it. Then heat rushed up my neck. What do you mean she shouldn't? Brooke sighed like I was being dramatic for reacting to something objectively awful. Aaron, please don't do this. I stared at the cabinet where Ruby's dress photo was taped. The edges were curling from being opened and closed 100 times. Don't do what? I asked. My voice sounded too calm, like it belonged to someone else. It's just Brooke lowered her voice like the walls had ears. It's a big wedding. There are a lot of important people. Nathan's family. You know, I did know. Everyone knew. My parents had been talking about Nathan's father, Richard, like he was a celebrity and a religion at the same time. His company was the bigger one, the one my parents' small business had partnered with recently. The partnership had already made their lives swell in size, like someone pumped air into them. New friends, new opportunities, new obsession with how it looks. And now my 9-year-old daughter was apparently a threat to it. I took a breath. Ruby has been preparing for this for months. Brooke made a small noise, impatient. Okay, no, you don't understand, I said, and I could hear the desperation in my own voice. I hated it. I hated needing them to have a conscience. She's been practicing what to say. She made cards. She asks me rules every day because she wants to do it right. She wants to be included. Brooke's tone hardened. Aaron, she's not a baby. I pressed. She's 9. She can sit with me. I'll take her outside if she needs a break. I will handle it. You're talking like she's what? Brooke snapped. I swallowed. Like she's embarrassing. Silence. Then Brooke exhaled, sharp and annoyed like I'd said the quiet part out loud. We can't risk anything, she said. Not at this wedding. Not with his family there. People don't understand. You know how it can be. My fingers curled around the phone. You're not worried about her being overwhelmed? You're worried about optics. That's not fair, Brooke said immediately, which is what people say when it's completely fair. You're my sister, I said. Ruby is your niece, and this is my wedding. Brooke shot back. We all discussed it. It's better this way. End of discussion. That line hit like a door slamming. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Because what do you say to someone who just told you calmly that your child is a liability? I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at Ruby's cards on the counter, her neat handwriting, her effort. And then behind me, I felt it. That shift in the air, the quiet weight of being watched. I turned. Ruby was standing in the doorway, clutching one of her index cards so tightly the paper bent. She had that expression she got when she was trying to keep her face neutral. The one that always made my throat burn because it looked like a child doing CPR on her own feelings. I didn't know how much she'd heard, but I knew she'd heard enough. Brooke was still talking. Aaron, are you there? I couldn't take my eyes off Ruby. Ruby didn't ask a question. She didn't offer a solution. She didn't say, I can be good, I can be quiet, I can try harder. She just swallowed once like she was forcing something down, and her voice came out too small. Okay, she said. That was it. No bargaining, no panic, just acceptance. Like she'd already learned that effort doesn't always earn you entry. I ended the call without saying goodbye. My hands shook. Not wildly, just enough to make me furious. Ruby's eyes flicked to the dress photo inside the cabinet, then away. She walked to the counter, picked up her cards and stacked them neatly, as if tidiness could make it hurt less. I turned back to my phone. There was a family chat. Of course, there was. My family loves group chats. It gives them an audience. I didn't call. I didn't talk it out. I didn't write a paragraph explaining my daughter's humanity. I just typed noted. We won't be attending and hit send. For a second, nothing happened. Then my phone lit up like a slot machine. Mom. Aaron, don't do this. Dad, this is one day. Brooke, you're making it into something it isn't. Someone else. Think about what you're teaching your kids. I didn't respond. Ruby quietly slid her cards into a drawer and closed it very carefully, like the sound might shatter her. I watched her do it and something in me went cold and clean. At the time, I didn't know it yet. None of us did. But that single decision to keep Ruby out would change everything. 3 weeks later, their lives were falling apart. I've been the oldest for as long as I can remember. Not in the cute I helped pack lunches way. In the if something breaks, it's my job to fix it way. When my parents were stressed, I became small and easy. When my sister wanted something, I learned how to give without being asked. It wasn't dramatic. It was just the shape of our family. Mom and Dad were always busy. Brooke was always loud, and I was always the one smoothing the edges. Even when I moved out, I didn't stop being the fixer. I hosted holidays. I brought dishes. I checked in. I apologized for other people's behavior like it was a hobby. Then I had Owen. And my family went insane in the way families do when a baby is easy to celebrate. Pictures, gifts, our little man. Mom cried at the hospital. Dad started calling himself Pop, like we were in a commercial. It was loud love, the kind that doesn't ask questions. Then Ruby came along. And Ruby was never bad. She was never difficult for the sake of it. She was just Ruby. When she was around 3 or 4, I started noticing small differences I couldn't name yet. She didn't like certain fabrics. Tags were a war crime. Loud birthday parties made her go stiff and silent, then explode later like her body couldn't hold the noise inside. She lined things up. She repeated phrases. She watched people like she was studying them for a test she didn't know the subject of. At first, everyone said the same things. She's sensitive. She'll grow out of it. You're overthinking. Then there was a day at a crowded indoor play place, when Ruby clapped her hands over her ears and slid under a table shaking. I was crouched beside her whispering, "Breathe with me." While other parents stared like my child was misbehaving, Mom said out loud, "Aaron, she's being dramatic." That was one of the first times I felt that sharp little snap inside me. The moment I realized my family didn't understand the difference between overwhelmed and disobedient. It took time to get answers, years of collecting little puzzle pieces, teachers hinting, pediatricians waving it off, me walking out of appointments with pamphlets about strong-willed children. Like that explained why my daughter cried when someone moved her cup. Then a few years ago, a specialist finally said the word autistic. The diagnosis was a weird mix of grief and relief. Grief because the world is not kind to kids who don't blend in. Relief because I wasn't imagining it. And now I could actually help her instead of guessing in the dark. I made a promise to myself that day, sitting in my car with my hands on the steering wheel, trying not to cry. Ruby would never be treated like a problem to hide. Not by strangers, and definitely not by my own family. I thought that promise would be easy, because who looks at a child and decides she's too inconvenient to love? Turns out plenty of people, especially the ones who love you conditionally. The first holiday after Ruby's diagnosis, she said something honest in the way she always did. Literal, direct, not rude, just unfiltered truth. An aunt laughed too loudly. Someone said, "Oh wow, she's such a little weirdo," like it was cute. Then Mom leaned into my ear and whispered, "You have to stop her from doing that." Not, "Is she okay?" Not, "How can we help?" Just make her more palatable. I tried the polite route for years. I explained autism in simple terms. I offered strategies. I asked for patience. I reminded them she wasn't being difficult. She was processing differently. They nodded. They smiled. They did nothing different. Ruby, meanwhile, started doing what a lot of kids like her do, masking. She watched people closely. She copied tone. She practiced phrases under her breath, like homework. She learned when to laugh, even if the joke didn't make sense. She learned how long to make eye contact, so people wouldn't say she was rude. She came home from school drained, holding herself together all day like she was carrying a heavy box with no handles. Then she'd collapse into silence on the couch, cheeks pale, eyes unfocused. Owen understood before anyone else did. At family gatherings, he'd drift toward Ruby like gravity. He'd hand her something to fidget with. He'd steer her away from loud kids. He'd jump in with a joke if an adult started staring. He never made it dramatic. He just protected her. My parents, on the other hand, started having important events. A dinner, a work thing, a party where they wanted to impress someone. At one of those gatherings, Ruby said something a little too literal to someone in a fancy suit. I watched the person blink, smile too tightly, and then turn away. Later, Mom pulled me aside and said, "This is exactly what I mean." "Exactly what?" I asked. Mom's eyes flicked toward the room like it was a stage. "We can't have that." That was when she used the word for the first time. Embarrassing. Ruby didn't hear that specific word that night, but she didn't need to. She felt the shift. She always did. She asked me in the car on the way home very quietly, "Am I hard to bring places?" I nearly swerved off the road. I told her no. I told her she was not too much. I told her the world was too small and we were going to find bigger spaces. But the question stayed with me because she didn't ask it like a dramatic child. She asked it like someone gathering data. Then Brooke got engaged, and suddenly the family's obsession with important people hit a new level. Brooke started saying Nathan's family like a title. Mom started talking about Richard, Nathan's dad, like he was a prize. Dad was suddenly wearing nicer clothes. Everyone was acting like this wedding was the doorway to a life they'd always deserved. And the thing is, it kind of was. My parents had always run a small business. Nothing glamorous. It paid the bills. It kept them proud. But once Brooke started dating Nathan, everything changed. His father ran the bigger company they partnered with. And my parents' world expanded fast. New contacts, bigger numbers, a taste of money they'd never had. The way they talked, you could almost hear the greed shining through the polite words. Now they were obsessed with keeping everything perfect. Because this wedding wasn't just family. It was the future they thought they were finally entitled to. Ruby heard wedding and latched onto it like it was a lighthouse. Her first big, formal event. A place with rules, clear expectations, a chance to be included properly. She asked me questions every day, not to be annoying, but because she wanted to do it right. And the hardest part was realizing she wasn't excited like a kid. She was excited like someone trying to earn a seat at a table she'd been hovering outside of her whole life. 3 weeks later, the wedding was over. We didn't go. That part didn't kill anyone. Shocking, I know. My phone still had the old messages sitting there unread, like a pile of garbage someone expected me to sort. Life at home settled into a quieter rhythm. Owen went back to school like normal. Ruby stopped asking about weddings entirely, like the topic had been quietly buried in the backyard. Easter came next. I've always hosted. It's just what I do. The fixer, remember? But this year, I did something different. I sent the Easter message to the usual family circle. Aunts, cousins, people who show up with potato salad and opinions. I did not include Mom, Dad, or Brooke. No announcement, no warning, no dramatic after everything you've done. Just a message with a time and a place like always. Owen watched me hit send and didn't say anything. He just nodded once like he understood the assignment. Ruby sat at the table drawing quietly, pretending not to listen, but her shoulders were less tense than usual, like the idea of not performing was a relief. The group chat responded normally at first. Do you need deviled eggs? I can bring dessert. What time should we come? Then the interruption came. Mom, wait. Are we not invited? The tone was sharp and staged, like she'd stepped onto a stage and adjusted her microphone. Brooke followed immediately. So first you don't attend my wedding, and now you're cutting us out of Easter. What is wrong with you? Dad jumped in too because of course he did. This is cruel, Aaron. You're punishing everyone. They weren't asking quietly. They weren't texting privately. They wanted witnesses. They wanted the whole family to see me being difficult because that's how they win. They make you feel shame under fluorescent lighting. I stared at the screen, that old reflex stirring in me. The one that wants to smooth it over, soften the edges, fix it. Then Ruby looked up from her drawing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't yelling. She was just watching my face like she was waiting to learn what truth costs. And something in me went still. I typed one message, just one. No speech, no diagnosis lesson, no begging for empathy. I didn't attend Brooke's wedding because you excluded Ruby for being autistic, and said you couldn't risk embarrassment in front of Nathan's family. So no, you're not invited to Easter. We're done. I hit send. The chat went weirdly quiet. No jokes, no emojis, no immediate backlash, just that awful pause where you can feel people reading. Then someone typed, "Is that true?" I didn't answer because if I answered that in the group chat, it would turn into a debate, and I wasn't putting my 9-year-old's dignity up for family voting like it was a casserole contest. A few minutes passed. Then, my phone rang. Unknown number at first. Then it stopped. Then, it rang again. This time, it came through with a name. Nathan. I stared at it for a beat, thumb hovering, brain doing that quick inventory of worst-case scenarios. Then, I picked up. "Hi," I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not dramatic, not angry, just careful, like he was walking across glass. "Aaron," he said quietly. "I'm sorry to call. I saw what you wrote." "Okay." Another pause. I could hear breathing like he was trying to decide how to ask without sounding like the villain. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did they really tell you Ruby couldn't come because they didn't want to risk embarrassment?" My throat tightened. I kept my voice level anyway. "Yes," I said. "That's what they said. And Ruby," he added softer. "She's 9. Yes." He didn't say that's insane, even though I could tell he wanted to. He didn't try to smooth it over. He didn't defend Brooke. He just went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I didn't know." "I know," I replied, another pause. "Thank you for telling me the truth," he said finally. Then he hung up. The next morning, the pounding started. Not a polite knock. Not a "Hey, can we talk?" Pounding. Owen appeared in the hallway instantly, like he'd been waiting for it. Ruby was behind him, quiet and pale, gripping the edge of her shirt. I opened the door, and there was Brooke. Her eyes were red, but not with sadness, with rage. Her hair was shoved back like she'd done it in a hurry. Her whole body looked wired, vibrating. She didn't say hello. She didn't look at Ruby. She launched straight at me like a missile. "What did you tell him?" she hissed. Who? I asked. Nathan, what did you tell my husband? Nothing. I kept my voice calm. He called me. I just told him the truth. Brooke's laugh was sharp and ugly. Of course he did. And of course, you couldn't wait. I didn't call him, I said. He asked if it was true. I said yes. Brooke stepped closer. He left. I didn't move. Left where? Brooke's face twisted. I don't know. Somewhere. He said he needed space. He said he needed to think. Her voice cracked on the last word like it physically offended her. He wouldn't even sleep at home. Owen's jaw clenched. Ruby went very still. Brooke noticed them then. Really noticed them. And instead of lowering her voice, she got louder. Good, she snapped, eyes flicking to Ruby like Ruby was an object on a counter. They should hear this. They should see what you've done. I felt something cold slide into place inside me. Brooke, leave. She jabbed a finger toward my chest. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made me look like a monster. You excluded your niece. I said, voice flat. Brooke shook her head fast like she could shake reality loose. We were protecting the wedding. No, I said you were protecting your image. Brooke surged forward into my space, and for a second I thought she was going to shove past me into my house. Her hand grabbed my arm hard, nails digging in. I yanked back, and Owen stepped forward without thinking. Don't touch my mom, he said. Brooke's eyes flashed. Stay out of it. Ruby made a small sound, barely a sound at all, and Brooke rounded on her like that sound was an insult. This is exactly why, she spat, and then caught herself too late. I saw Ruby's face change, that familiar shutdown, that awful retreat, and something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clean. Get out, I said. Brooke's chest heaved. Her voice rose, wild and shaking, filling my doorway while my kids watched. You did this to me. And that was the moment I understood this wasn't just a family fight anymore. It was a safety moment, and I wasn't going to lose it. Easter still happened at my house. Not because I was trying to prove a point. Because I refused to let Brooke's tantrums steal another day from my kids. I kept the curtains open. I kept the door locked. I let Owen help hide eggs in the yard. I let Ruby decide where she wanted to sit. And nobody looked at her like she was a problem to manage. It was quieter than it had ever been. No walking on eggshells, no translating passive-aggressive comments, no just ignore it, whispered in the kitchen. For one day, it felt like peace might actually hold, and I let myself believe briefly that the blow-up was the end of it. Then a few days later, there was a knock at my door, not pounding, knocking, soft, polite. When I opened it, both my parents were standing there with the kind of smiles people wear when they're trying to sell you something. Mom held a container like it was a peace offering. Dad's hands were in his pockets, shoulders lifted like he was trying to look harmless. Hi, Aaron, Mom said, voice syrupy. Can we talk? I didn't step aside. About what? Mom's smile twitched. We hate how things have been. Dad nodded quickly. This has gotten out of hand. Mom continued. We want to make it right. We didn't realize how it sounded. The words were sweet, but the urgency underneath them was sharp enough to cut. I waited. Mom's eyes flicked past me toward the living room like she was checking if Ruby was visible. There's concern, she said carefully, about the partnership there. It was the real wound. Dad cleared his throat. They're reconsidering some things. Mom rushed in. Nothing is final yet. It's just tense. Nathan has been distant. It's all very complicated, but we think there's a way to fix it. I crossed my arms. Let me guess. That way involves me doing emotional labor for free. Mom laughed lightly like I'd made a joke and not a statement of fact. We're hosting a family dinner, she said. Everyone will be there. Brooke and Nathan's parents, Richard and Victoria, Dad added. They want to talk. Clear the air. Mom's smile widened. We want you there. And Owen and Ruby. My stomach tightened. Ruby. Mom nodded quickly like she was very proud of herself. Yes, Ruby will be included. We'll do whatever adjustments she needs. Quiet space, safe foods, breaks, whatever makes her comfortable. It sounded rehearsed, like they'd written it down. Dad stepped forward slightly. This is a chance, Aaron, for healing. For a second I almost laughed. They hadn't come to apologize. They'd come because their shiny new future was wobbling, and they needed me to hold it steady. Mom leaned in, lowering her voice like she was sharing something intimate. Please just come. If they see you're willing, if Ruby is there, it will show we're a family, that we can handle this. I stared at them, and I could feel the old reflex in my bones. The fixer, the smoother, the one who makes everyone comfortable. Then I thought about Ruby's face in the kitchen, the way she'd said, okay, like she'd been training for rejection her whole life. I didn't say yes at the door. I said, I'll think about it. Mom's relief was immediate. Too quick, like she'd been sure I'd fold. After they left, I sat at my table with Owen and Ruby. Owen didn't look thrilled. It's a trap, he said bluntly. Ruby stared at her hands. If we go, will they want me there? That question hurt more than any screaming. They said you can come, I answered carefully. Ruby's eyes lifted, hopeful in that careful way that always made me want to cry. Not excited, not joyful, hopeful like she was stepping onto thin ice. I didn't agree because I trusted my parents. I agreed because Ruby deserved one moment where family didn't mean enduring. So we went. Mom and Dad's house looked like it had been staged for a magazine spread called People Who Are Definitely Not Panicking. Too clean, too bright, too many smiles. Brooke was there, wearing her new wife glow-like armor. Nathan stood off to the side, quiet and tight in the jaw. Richard and Victoria sat at the table like they were watching a documentary, polite, still taking notes without a notebook. Mom made a big show of accommodations. Quiet room, soft lighting, Ruby's safe foods. She said it loudly like she wanted applause for basic decency. Ruby nodded and kept her eyes on her plate. Dinner started fine. Almost fine, the kind of fine that makes you think maybe this was just a nightmare. Then Mom stood up with her glass. Of course she did. I'm just so glad we're all together, she said, voice syrupy. And I want to clear something up. People don't understand autism. It can be difficult. Sometimes Ruby says things and people can be offended, and we just didn't want that to happen at the wedding. But we love her in our own way. This doesn't mean we don't love a child. Ruby's shoulders pulled inward. Her gaze dropped like she was trying to make herself smaller in real time. And my parents looked pleased with themselves, like they'd just delivered a TED Talk called How to Exclude Someone Kindly. Richard didn't raise his voice. He didn't even change his expression much. He just leaned forward slightly and asked one question, calm as a knife. Do you think Ruby is lesser because she's autistic? The room froze. Mom's smile stayed on her face for half a second too long, then cracked. Dad stared at his plate like the answer might be printed on it. Brooke's eyes flicked to Nathan, desperate, and Ruby stayed looking down. Mom gave a thin laugh. No, of course not. It's just people don't understand. We were trying to make it easier. Richard nodded once like he'd heard enough. Then he said quietly, I'm autistic. Dead silence. Brooke went rigid. Dad blinked like his brain stalled. Mom's mouth opened and didn't find a sound. Richard didn't linger on it. No dramatic build-up. Just fact. My whole life, he continued. People looked at me the way you just looked at her. Like I was a risk. Like I needed managing. That's why I stopped telling people. I learned to mask. I learned to blend. And I got very good at it. Ruby's head lifted slowly like she couldn't help it because the person everyone in that room treated like royalty had just said the word autistic like it wasn't shameful at all. Richard turned to Ruby, his voice softened, but it didn't turn sugary. Ruby, he said, you are not lesser. You're not broken. You don't have to shrink to make people comfortable. You can do anything you want, anything. And when people try to make you smaller, that tells you something about them, not about you. Ruby stared at him wide-eyed. Then her chin lifted a fraction more, like she was testing the shape of confidence. Richard leaned back, looked at my parents, and his tone went flat again. And as for the partnership, he said, it's not going to work. Mom's face drained. Please. Richard stood. Victoria stood with him. Nathan stood too, not looking at Brooke. Richard didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He didn't give them the dignity of a debate. He just left. Nathan followed. The front door closed. and the silence that remained felt heavier than any shouting. My parents sat there, stunned, like they'd just watched their future walk out on its own legs. Ruby didn't look down anymore. I reached for her hand. Owen was already at her side, and I did what I should have done a long time ago. I stood up, took my kids, and walked out without saying a word. 6 months later, our house is quiet in the best way. No dread, no group chat drama, no family meeting ambushes disguised as concern. Owen laughs like he's not on duty anymore. Ruby doesn't flinch when the doorbell rings. She's got friends now, real ones, the kind who don't treat her like a problem to solve. She's still Ruby, still rule-loving, still blunt sometimes. But she says what she thinks without staring at my face afterward, like she's waiting to be punished for existing. And me, I'm still no contact. The easiest boundary I've ever kept once I stopped confusing guilt with love. The fallout came in pieces through other people, like gossip delivered with a side of shock. Brooke's marriage didn't survive the "we excluded your niece because she might embarrass us" conversation. Nathan moved out, then made it official. Divorced. Richard didn't just pause the partnership. He ended it clean. Final. The kind of cut you don't stitch back together. My parents tried to scramble. They begged. They blamed me. They tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. But once the bigger company pulled out, everyone else suddenly remembered they had concerns too. Contracts dried up, accounts closed, calls stopped getting returned. The small business they were so proud of gone. The house they loved showing off, sold. Last I heard, they were renting a place across town and telling anyone who would listen that I destroyed the family. Which is funny because I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped covering it up. Sometimes I think about that day in my kitchen, Ruby holding her little cards. Saying okay, like she'd already decided she wasn't worth the effort. Then I think about her now sitting on the couch with friends texting her. And I remember what peace feels like when you stop begging to be treated like family. So, what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for